there is a great danger, and that's why we've got to find a way of walking and chewing gum at the same time. And it's not going to be easy, but because of this absolute catastrophe that was looming of climate change, we've got to find a way of making this happen. And this will require wise statesmanship.
Welcome back to BVTV, Breaking Views. I'm Peter Thal-Larsen, the global editor of Breaking Views, and I'm joined again by Reuters commentator at large, Hugo Dixon. Hugo, good to see you again.
Lovely to see you, Peter.
So our topic today is global trade and global warming. Hugo, you're just back from COP27, the big UN climate conference in Egypt, and it seems that trade was one of the topics that didn't get much airtime. You think that's an oversight? Why is that?
Well, it's an oversight because, first of all, trade has contributed quite a lot to carbon emissions. And secondly, trade can do quite a lot to help rein in climate change. So it has been a problem, but it actually is part of the solution to the problem. And although it wasn't on the main agenda, it was a bit there in the edges. The World Trade Organization Director General, she attended the last COP, the previous one in Glasgow. That was the first time, I think, that the World Trade Organization had attended it. And she was quite lively on the fringes in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. But it's not yet seen as a sort of part of a mainstream solution. And it actually can play quite a significant role.
Yes, you sort of laid out in this piece you've written for us about these sort of 5 principles of how you think sort of global trade policy and sort of climate change could interact, or combating climate change could interact. Just give us a quick nutshell. What are some of the main things that you could do? Okay, well, I mean, first of all, there are 2 really hot chestnuts at the moment. One is that the European Union is going to, we think next month, is actually going to lay out its plans for a carbon border adjustment mechanism. This is applying tariffs on imports into Europe where there is a lot of carbon in the imports, and where the country that is on the other end isn't actually putting a carbon tariff at home, a carbon tax at home. So this is potentially a very good idea because it will level the playing field, and it will prevent what's known as carbon leakage, where one country or group of countries, cracks down on carbon at home, but just imports it from abroad. But the key thing is, how do you do this in a fair way, when all sorts of different countries are thinking of different ways and there are no agreed ground rules, and particularly it's not just a question of comparing a tax with a tax in another country. There's a question, should you look at the regulations in the other country as well, and can that then be equivalent? And so while in theory it's a really brilliant idea, it could be a mess. And so there needs to be some order in the chaos, and the World Trade Organization and others are trying to think of some sort of ground rules, as it were. Another one, which is a really hot chestnut, is this mega legislation, this climate bill that went through in America a couple of months ago, the IRA, so-called Inflation Reduction Act. It's mainly a climate bill with $369 billion of subsidies, which is, again, very good for the climate, but it distorts trade because it's a subsidy mainly for American producers. In some cases, Canadians get the subsidy too, but not others. And so I mean, if you don't sort that out, you could have, a trade war developing. Well, because it does sound like this sort of, trade is already complicated and quite tense. We had Trump and his tariffs against China, but also tensions between the US and Europe and others. And if you sort of layer on a climate agenda, isn't there as you say, a danger that the barriers go up?
Well, there is a great danger, and that's why we've got to find a way of walking and chewing gum at the same time. And it's not going to be easy, but because of this absolute catastrophe that was looming of climate change, we've got to find a way of making this happen, and this will require wise statesmanship. And then I just give you three other ideas out there. These three ideas, which are sort of, they're sort of old ideas which may come back on the agenda. I mean, one is this: countries should stop subsidizing fossil fuels. I mean, it's one thing we didn't in Sharm el-Sheikh. We didn't get an agreement to phase down fossil fuels, but what about stopping subsidizing them? But and when you look at the implicit subsidies, which is actually not taxing them for the carbon output and other things, and the IMF calculates this is $5.6 trillion a year, which is 8% of global GDP, is going into subsidies of one form or another for fossil fuels. So that's one thing but that's been on the agenda. People have been talking about that for years. The G20 talked about it in Bali last week, but they first talked about it in 2009. So but maybe the time comes right. Another old chestnut is shipping and aviation, although shipping is the real culprit for moving trade around the world. And shipping and airlines are about 12% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Well, and one of the problems is that they fall out more or less out of any country's jurisdiction, although it is possible to imagine ways that you could have some sort of extra jurisdictional approach, or at least you tax those ships that go in and out of your own ports. And so that would be another thing that would then stop countries, or stop people, these very complex supply chains where you whiz things around just to save a fraction of money and you're actually polluting the planet.
Right.
And then the final thing, if I just give it to you, is which the WTO Director General was pushing, is the idea that we should actually have a positive agenda to cut tariffs on green goods. So as well as putting tariffs on dirty things, we need to cut them on green things. And actually, she pointed out in Sharm el-Sheikh that in many countries, there's actually higher tariffs on green goods than there are on dirty ones, which it seems balmy.
So it's basically what you're saying is that it's time to sort of build the climate change priorities into the trade framework, and then in the process, hopefully try and kickstart the free trade movement again. I mean, I suppose that will be something for the next climate conference in Dubai in a year's time.
Well, it might be. I mean, you can do these things bit by bit. They don't have to be done at a COP, because they could be done through the World Trade Organization or bilateral negotiations between America and EU. But there is quite a lot, in my view, to be said for making progress on all five, and then perhaps when the time is right, having some grand bargain on trade and climate. Okay, well, we look forward to that when it happens, Hugo. But good to hear something positive coming out of the COP summit. Thank you for your time, and talk to you again soon.